not a blade of grass. We are a peaceful people, struggle is always struggle, and we don't look for trouble, just ask around. But when outside faces from foreign places talk about taking over, we ain't backing down. We ain't giving up no mountains, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one courage, not a blade of grass. This land is all I know. We gonna make it somehow. We will bend like a bow and never break. Our fathers came here and they lived and died here, and we ain't moving nowhere. Big mistake. Cause we ain't giving up no mountain, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one rice, not a blade of grass. We love the open country of the Rupununi and the Essequibo, daytime or night. Though we may criticize it, this is our home, we love it, and we need to keep it. We have that right. So we ain't giving up no mountain, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one courage, not a blade of grass. So we ain't giving up no more.
Honorable members, I declare this 36th meeting of the National Assembly of the 12th Parliament of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana to be duly constituted and in session. The clerk will lead us in prayer.
Almighty God, we who are here gathered together, do most humbly beseech thee to guide us in all our consultations, so that we may together build a land where knowledge is free, where the mind is without fear, the head is held high, and where words come from the depth of truth. Grant us, O God, thine aid and guidance, so that we may deal justly with the several causes that come before us, laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and personal preferences, so that the result of our counsel may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion, the preservation of justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the President, and the peace and prosperity of Guyana. Grant us, O God, the vision so to lead, that all the people of this fair land may enter into that state of brotherhood and unity, where the mind is led forward by thee in the ever-widening thought and action.
Thank you, honorable members. Please be seated.
Messages from the President. Announcements by the Speaker.
Honorable members, at 11:40 a.m. this morning, I received from my secretary a letter from the Honorable Member, Mr. Joseph Harmon, resigning his position with immediate effect as leader of the opposition. Let me make a word of apology for this delayed start, especially to the Honorable Senior Minister in the Office of the President with responsibility for finance. I had some consultations with the parties in the National Assembly who are not in the government. And the party which the Honorable Deputy Leader represents, the Honorable Deputy Speaker has said to me that he would not be part of what transpires with respect to a new member of the opposition, and the chief whip for the APNU AFC has said that they will indicate to me at a later time their availability for me to convene a meeting for the election of a new opposition leader. Honorable members, of late I have been aware of several inaccurate and distorted comments inside of the House and outside of the Assembly. These being made by honorable members, many of whom should know better. Many of these inaccurate and distorted comments relate to the issue of questions and motions. I use this opportunity to outline the process of how questions and motions qualify for the order paper. When questions and motions are received by the Clerk of the National Assembly, they are read to ensure that they are in keeping with Standing Order number 20 and Standing Order number 26. And these are well detailed in your standing orders. If in the opinion of the clerk, questions and motions are in or out of order, he would advise the Speaker accordingly. However, under the standing orders, the Speaker of the National Assembly has the sole authority to determine the admissibility or inadmissibility of questions and motions. Further, if a question or motion is disallowed by the Speaker, his decision is conveyed to the member by the clerk. The Speaker is not required under the standing orders to give reasons for disallowing questions and motions. We do as a matter of courtesy. After a question or motion is approved by the Speaker, the member is notified, and thereafter, the question or motion is published on a notice paper. A question is published on a notice paper 21 clear days before it is placed on the order paper. A government motion is placed on notice paper 6 clear days before it is placed on an order paper. Notwithstanding Standing Order 28.2, which states, with the consent of the Speaker, a government motion may be placed upon the order paper for the sitting of the day following that on which notice was given to the clerk. A private member's motion is published on notice paper 12 clear days before it's placed on the order paper. And those standing orders, I ask honorable members to again refamiliarize yourselves with. Just for the information of those persons, honorable members, I should say, who are and may not be aware of the questions and motions that we have received thus far in this 12th Parliament, the following is the summary. Private members' motions. We have had 12 of those. 6 of those have been approved for the Assembly, and 6 were disallowed. Questions received by the Parliament Office, 469. Questions approved with or without amendments by the Speaker, 412. Number of questions disallowed by the Speaker, 57. So this is the record which I am proud of. I also want to draw members' attention to cries of shame. And in the last sitting of the National Assembly, this reverberated through the chambers in spite of me speaking and cautioning members about it. On the 5th of February 2007, the then the then Speaker of the National Assembly had to raise this issue. And he mentioned the gravity of interruptions, especially by loud cries of shame, I'm quoting. And I intend to uphold the position of then Speaker Ramkaran as we proceed henceforth. Mr. Clerk?
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers and reports, etc.
Honorable members, I present to the Assembly the minutes of the proceedings of the 5th meeting of the Committee of Selection, which was held on Monday, the 24th of January, 2022. Honorable Senior Minister in the Office of the President with responsibility for finance.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to present to the Assembly the estimates of revenue and expenditures of Guyana for the financial year 2022. Thank you very much, sir.
Mr. Clerk?
Reports from committees. Oral questions without notice. Questions and notice. Statements by ministers, including policy statements. Personal explanations. Requests for leave to move the adjournment of the National Assembly on definite matters of urgent public importance. Motions relating to the business or sittings of the National Assembly and moved by a minister.
Honorable Minister of Parliamentary Affairs and Governance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to present the following motion to the House. Suspension motion. Be it resolved that standing orders number 10, subclause 2, and standing order 38, subclause 9A, be suspended to enable the senior minister in the office of the President with responsibility for finance to complete uninterrupted the reading of the budget speech for 2022 at this sitting of the National Assembly on Wednesday, the 26th of January, 2022. I therefore have proposed a motion, sir.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. The motion is proposed. I now put the motion. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. The motion is carried. Honorable members, we now come to the item budget. Sorry. Mr. Clerk?
Introduction of bills, public business, government's business.
Honorable members, we have now come to the item budget for 2022. Honorable Senior Minister in the Office of the President with responsibility for finance will move the motion for the approval of the estimates of revenues and expenditure for this financial year 2022. Honorable Senior Minister in the Office of the President with responsibility for finance, you may proceed, Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise to move the motion for the approval of the estimates of the public sector and the budget for the financial year 2022. And in doing so, I wish to indicate that Cabinet has recommended that the National Assembly proceed upon this motion pursuant to Article 171, Paragraph 2 of the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2022 is the third budget that this People's Progressive Party civic government is submitting to this Honorable House in our current term of office. It comes to this House a mere 18 months since the culmination of that epic struggle to defend a democracy that was waged for 5 months following the unforgettable March 2020 elections. History now records it indelibly that struggle secured the triumph of democracy over dictatorship and safeguarded the supremacy of the will of the people. Over the 18 months that have elapsed since democracy prevailed, pessimism has been replaced with optimism. Lethargy has made way for energy. Superficiality has made way for substance. And pomp and pageantry have made way for humility and hard work. Yes. The policy void that existed then has been replaced with vision and clear direction. That's right. Institutional inertia has been replaced with dynamism. And empty rhetoric has been replaced with concrete action. Today, investors who had walked away are returning, and projects that had stalled have resumed. Where there was once economic contraction, there is now economic expansion. And where there were once job losses, there is now job creation. These developments are clear for all to see, and they illustrate amply the indisputable relationship between democratic and economic outcomes. Lest we make the mistake of taking for granted the freedoms for which so many have fought for so long and so hard, the events of 29th December 2021 in this very House provided a stark reminder of the dangers that still threaten our democratic institutions. It is indeed sobering to contemplate that the reins of government once not so long ago rested in the same hands that sought to desecrate the sanctity of this House in the manner that happened last month. Clearly, Mr. Speaker, those who are yet to learn that dictatorship is a discredited form of governance are also yet to learn that hooliganism has no place in civilized political discourse. The events of that memorable day serve the important purpose of showcasing for the world the political landscape within which we operate here in Guyana. Mr. Speaker, with this very political landscape in mind, we in this People's Progressive Party civic government are determined to continue to distinguish ourselves from the alternative. We are battened down in our resolution to serve the cause of unifying the people of Guyana, and at the same time to ensure that the lives of all Guyanese are meaningfully, demonstrably, and lastingly improved. Forever faithful to the timeless refrain of our national motto, one people, one nation, one destiny, we are relentless in our commitment to a path of national unity and national prosperity. Nowhere is this better articulated than in the vision of one Guyana that was outlined by His Excellency the President right here in this hallowed house almost exactly 1 year ago. It is that vision of one Guyana that guides us in all we do. And most immediately, it is that vision of one Guyana that guides us now as we present Budget 2022. As we do so, we are not unmindful, sir, of the severe challenges that continue to beset both the global and domestic environment in which we operate. To begin with, COVID-19 continues its relentless course through variant after variant, each one wreaking a new installment of public health havoc across the globe. Since I presented Budget 2021 last year, 245 million more cases and 3.2 million more deaths have been confirmed, bringing the cumulative number of cases and deaths worldwide to 353 million and 5.6 million, respectively. The highly contagious Omicron variant has brought a record spike in infections, with global cases reaching a high of 4 million on the 20th of January 2022, sparking a new wave of containment measures worldwide. Mr. Speaker, like every other country around the world, Guyana could not escape COVID-19's inexorable grip on daily human existence. The main anchor of our government's response has been the deployment of an aggressive vaccination campaign. Currently, Mr. Speaker, 82.1% of the adult population of Guyana has received at least one dose, while 60.3% of the adult population is fully vaccinated. Undoubtedly, our vaccination successes have helped to contain the most severe consequences of infection and have helped to reduce hospitalization and mortality rates. But despite this, stubborn pockets of vaccine hesitancy continue to threaten our prospects of achieving herd immunity and delay the return to any semblance of normalcy. Beyond its global public health consequences, COVID-19 has also had severe disruptive effects on global production and trade, and particularly on the global supply chain. Since the onset of COVID-19, supply chains around the world have been clogged up with disruptions in critical shipping routes due to port congestion, shortages in labor and key materials, and fluctuating demand. Additionally, a shortage in container availability drove up freight charges significantly. The consequence has been freight rates that have increased by over 400% over the past 2 years, with most of that increase occurring in 2021. As a result, Mr. Speaker, inflationary pressures were amplified the world over, and global inflation is at its highest in at least a decade, and in some places inflation is at its highest in over 4 decades. The disruptions created by the pandemic are not expected to dissipate in the near term. Mr. Speaker, our government has moved to contain the pass-through to the domestic economy. Specific interventions implemented to date include restricting the freight cost to pre-COVID-19 levels for the purposes of determining the taxable value of imports. This measure is estimated to have saved Guyanese businesses and consumers nearly $4 billion since its implementation in August 2021. Additionally, successive reductions in the excise tax rate charged on gasoline and diesel, first in February 2021 from 50% to 35%, And then in October, from 35 to 20%, also helped contain the cost of domestic transportation, which feeds through directly to prices more broadly. Mr. Speaker, as if COVID-19 were not enough, 2021 also brought the most severe floods in living memory. The 2021 floods were even more devastating than the 2005 floods and resulted in a national disaster being declared. During the first half of last year, we experienced the second highest level of rainfall since 1981, with the month of May alone recording 607.7 millimeters, compared with 474.5 millimeters in May 2020. The floods that followed left none of our regions unharmed. In the productive sector, over 130,000 acres of farmland were affected, and approximately 1.3 million animals were lost. Here again, sir, our government moved swiftly to deploy mobile pumps to remove the water from the land and heavy equipment to clear previously blocked channels and shore up structures that came under threat. We distributed 3,761 medical kits to reduce the risk of waterborne disease and 74,162 food hampers to provide relief to households in distress. In addition, Mr. Speaker, we distributed over $7 billion in relief cash grants to households and to the agriculture sector, in addition to thousands of bags of seed paddy to help rice farmers recover from the flood. Unavoidably, Mr. Speaker, the temporary disruption to production of food items caused by the floods contributed to some price escalation in the domestic marketplace. But these started to revert somewhat as the year progressed and as production resumed. The immediacy of our interventions helped to facilitate a quick recovery from the floods. Nevertheless, the reality of our acute vulnerability to climate change and to extreme weather events is ever present and will only be mitigated with very significant investments aimed at achieving greater climate resilience. Mr. Speaker, even as we confront head-on the formidable challenges before us, our government continues to work in earnest to advance the aggressive agenda for transformation that we had previously outlined. At this moment of unprecedented opportunity for our country, we seek now to convert the bright prospects before us into realized national and individual well-being for all Guyanese. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, Budget 2022 has historic significance. Building on the foundation laid by the previous two budgets, Budget 2022 launches what will be the most rapid period of transformation and modernization ever witnessed in Guyana's entire history. As I will shortly elaborate, sir, Budget 2022 provides for massive investment in infrastructure that will change the face of our country forever. Opening vast new tracts of land for productive purposes, establishing entire new communities while connecting others, and making thousands of Guyanese homeowners for the very first time. This budget lays the basis for thousands of rewarding jobs to be created for Guyanese nationals, including by leveraging the local content opportunities that are now being created. And it provides for relevant training to ensure that the Guyanese workforce is suitably equipped. This budget lays the cornerstone, sir, for a visible leap in the coverage and quality of social services enjoyed by our Guyanese brothers and sisters. including and especially the most vulnerable. It is also important to note, sir, that Budget 2022 is the first budget that will benefit from financing from the proceeds of Guyana's new and emerging oil sector. In this regard, this budget, supported by the robust institutional architecture that this government has established, ensures that two complementary and critically important objectives are met. First, that the urgent development needs of the country are met in the shortest possible time, while secondly and simultaneously, that the long-term economic well-being of the country is protected and safeguarded at all times. Mr. Speaker, we must never take for granted the challenges and risks that lie before us. They are real and formidable. At the same time, we must be cognizant of the vastness of the opportunities that beckon us as a nation. And we must have the vision and courage to convert those opportunities into a positive and lasting reality, remaining faithful always to the oneness of our country. Budget 2022 does precisely this. And it is therefore presented under the theme, steadfast against all challenges, resolute in building our one Guyana. I will now review the global and regional economic context within which Budget 2022 comes to this Honorable House. Mr. Speaker, as indicated earlier, global economic performance continues to be dominated by COVID-19. Undoubtedly, the 9.9 vaccine doses administered worldwide to date would have helped to limit the severity of the pandemic's impact. However, the spikes caused by successive variants has resulted in some rolling back of previously relaxed containment measures. These factors, combined with the impact of the significant government support measures implemented in both advanced and emerging market and developing economies, led to the global economy recording a significant rebound from the 2020 contraction. Global growth is now estimated at 5.9% in 2021. Underlying this was estimated growth of 5% in advanced economies led by the United Kingdom, the United States, and the Euro area, which grew by 7.2%, 5.6%, and 5.2% respectively. Emerging market and developing economies grew by 6.5%, with particularly strong performances from China and India at 8.1% and 9% respectively. Latin America and the Caribbean recorded growth of 6.8%. And within the Caribbean, the latest estimate of overall growth in our sub-region is 3% in 2021. But excluding Guyana, that estimate is revised downwards to 1.2%, reflecting continued subdued conditions in the tourism sector. Looking ahead to 2022, global growth prospects are subject to a high level of uncertainty. Renewed outbreaks, continued trade disruptions, and rising commodity prices are just a few of the downside risks to this year's outlook. Against this backdrop, global growth for 2022 is projected to be lower at 4.4%. Output in advanced economies and emerging market and developing economies is expected to grow by 3.9% and 4.8% respectively, while growth in Latin America and the Caribbean is expected to moderate to 2.4%. Meanwhile, the Caribbean is expected to grow by 11% overall, but by 6.1% if Guyana were to be excluded. As mentioned earlier, COVID-19 had adverse impacts on the global supply chain, thereby fueling global inflationary pressure. Rising commodity prices coupled with the supply-demand mismatches resulted in inflation rates increasing rapidly, both in advanced economies and in some emerging market and developing countries. In the advanced world, the UK saw the highest inflation since 1992, while the US has reported a 7% 12-month inflation rate at the end of 2021, the fastest consumer price increases since 1982. Similarly, in Canada, annual inflation reached 4.8%, the highest level since 1991. Prices also soared in the Euro area and in Latin America and the Caribbean, with growth in consumer prices estimated at 5% and 9.3%, respectively. Mr. Speaker, like all commodity exporting nations, Guyana remains particularly susceptible to global price fluctuations, as evidenced by significant swings in our export earnings across some commodities in 2021. Across our main exports, rice and logs recorded an overall drop in prices. The average world market price of rice fell by 7.8% to $458.3 per metric ton on account of increased supply in large producing countries. Similarly, the average price of logs decreased by 2.7% from $278.9 per cubic meter. The average world market price for sugar, on the other hand, rose by 37.6% at the end of last year to an estimated 39 cents per kilogram. With respect to precious metals, the average price for gold increased by 1.7% to $1,799.6 per troy ounce. And similarly, there was a significant increase in aluminum prices, which grew by 45.1% in 2021 to $2,472.8 per metric ton. With respect to crude oil, prices rose by 66.5% to an average of $70.4 per barrel in 2021. This increase resulted from supply disruptions and the global energy crunch, the latter resulting from unprecedented growth in demand combined with dwindling supplies. Mr. Speaker, in 2022, prices are expected to taper for most of our export commodities. The price of rice is expected to decline further by 12.7% to $400 per metric ton. Similarly, the world market price for sugar is expected to contract by 5% to 37 cents per kilogram. Further, while the price of gold is also projected to fall in 2022 by 2.8% to $1,750 per troy ounce, the prices of aluminum and logs are expected to rise. Like aluminum, the average price of crude oil is also expected to increase this year, growing by 5%, owing to continued high demand to an average of $74 per barrel in 2022. Mr. Speaker, I will now review developments in the domestic economy in 2021. In this regard, sir, real gross domestic product in Guyana is estimated to have grown by 19.9%, while non-oil GDP is estimated to have grown by 4.6% in 2021. This, I hasten to add, sir, was achieved despite the persistence of COVID-19, as well as the devastating impact of the 2021 floods. With this overall rate of growth, that is to say the 19.9% overall, Guyana is likely to be amongst the 3 fastest growing economies worldwide in 2021. The very creditable performance of the non-oil productive sector reflects the delicate and dynamic policy balance struck between aggressive containment of COVID-19 on the one hand and phased reopening of the economy on the other hand. It also reflects the prompt and proactive flood mitigation measures, which helped limit the fallout in the agriculture sector and supported the sector in resuming activity in the shortest possible time. Additionally, sir, I might add that the services sector recorded extraordinarily strong performances in response to a policy framework that has stimulated historic levels of demand for services and that has facilitated a commensurate response on the supply side. Sectoral performance: agriculture, forestry, and fishing. Mr. Speaker, the agriculture, forestry, and fishing sectors bore the brunt of the impact of the floods and are estimated to have contracted by 9.1% in 2021. This position is largely on account of reducing output in the sugar growing, rice growing, and other crops subsectors, which outweighed improved performance in the forestry, fishing, and livestock subsectors. Mr. Speaker, despite the devastation caused by the flood, the sugar growing subsector managed to contain the reduction in its value added to 34.7% in 2021 and delivered total sugar production of 58,025 tons. This reflects the destruction of some 4,300 hectares of cane in inundated fields in the first half of 2021. It is estimated, sir, that approximately 35% of the standing cane for the second crop was lost as a result of the floods. At Albion Estate alone, it is estimated that the mortality rate for the standing canes planned to be harvested for the first crop was 80%. Having drained some 4.5 million tons of water off the lands, the industry was only able to save some of the surviving cane. Similarly, sir, the record high rainfall observed in the first half of last year also had a severe impact on the rice growing sector. But the sector managed to confine the reduction in its value added to 20.5%, with total paddy production in 2021 amounting to 859,993 tons, which resulted in 558,995 tons of rice being produced despite the floods. Mr. Speaker, the other crops subsector is estimated to have contracted by 9.8% in 2021. When compared with the output from this industry in 2020, significant declines are observed for many fruits, vegetables, spices, etc. Here again, the impact of the flood was sharp and severe. The reduced output of many items under this category was observed in the marketplace and fed through to prices of these and related commodities. On the upside, growth in the livestock subsector is estimated at 9.2% in 2021, despite the heavy loss of livestock in the floods. This increase is on account of growth in the production of poultry meat, beef, pork, and mutton, all of which rather are estimated to have expanded by 16.5, 13.9, 23.6, and 21.3% respectively. These more than offset the estimated declines in the production of eggs and milk. The increase in production reflects the growth in demand which followed the relaxation of COVID-19 restrictions on restaurants and other food establishments, combined with very strong demand in the oil and gas and mining sectors. Similarly, Mr. Speaker, The forestry subsector is estimated to have expanded in 2021 by 11.3%. Some level of recovery was noted in the latter months of the year after the initial impact of the floods affected accessibility and declarations. According to the latest declarations, timber output grew from 344,179 cubic meters in 2020 to 383,189 cubic meters in 2021. Mr. Speaker, despite the well-known challenges currently being faced by the subsector, fishing is estimated to have grown by 11%. Having shown signs of recovery in the latter half of 2021, which resulted in some 15.7% growth in fish production. Notable increases were observed in production across all fish products, with the most significant growth observed for industrial finfish, which grew by 235.4%. Undermining the subsector's overall performance was a 13.5% decline in the production of shrimp as a result of declines in catches of white belly and industrial sea bob shrimp. These declines outweighed increased catches of artisanal sea bob shrimp and prawns. The extractive industries. Mr. Speaker, the mining and quarrying sector is estimated to have expanded by 36.5% in 2021. Driven mainly by an expansion in the oil and gas and support services subsector, which, when combined with the estimated growth in the other mining and quarrying subsector, outweighs the contraction in the gold and bauxite mining subsectors. A total of 42.7 million barrels of oil were produced in 2021, compared with 27.2 million in 2020. This level of output was supported by the remedying of the mechanical issues initially encountered, as a result of which the oil production rate for 2021 is now estimated as approximately 116,900 barrels of oil per day. The increased level of production resulted in the subsector's value added increasing by an estimated 46.5%. Output in the bauxite mining subsector is estimated to have declined by 3.8% in 2021. In the latter half of the year, along with the effects of the continuous rainfall on the condition of access roads and on mining operations in some locations, one of the large operators faced mechanical issues with some of their machinery, thereby resulting in output falling by an estimated 12.7% below their 2020 performance. This outweighed the 155% growth in output recorded by the other operator, who is somewhat smaller. Mr. Speaker, the gold mining subsector is estimated to have contracted by 14.8% in 2021, driven by lower output from both large and small and medium-scale producers. On account of technical, financial, and administrative challenges, the combined output from the large operators declined by 31.7% in 2021 to 68,268 troy ounces. Further, the small and medium-scale operators declared 11.3% less ounces in 2021, taking total 2021 output to 499,054 troy ounces. In contrast, in the latter half of 2021, output from the other mining and quarrying subsector, which comprises diamond, sand, and stone mining, continued its upper trajectory. The subsector is estimated to have expanded by 81.6% in 2021. Diamond declarations grew by an estimated 82.2% to 45,106 metric carats last year. Sand extraction and stone production are estimated to have grown by 132.8% and 15.9%, respectively, partly supported by heavy emphasis, largely rather supported by heavy emphasis of construction activity in the government's public sector investment program, PSIP, as well as rapid expansion in private sector construction activity. Manufacturing. Mr. Speaker, the manufacturing sector is estimated to have grown by 3.5% in 2021. While rice and sugar manufacturing are estimated to have declined by 16.1% and 34.7% respectively, the other manufacturing sector is estimated to have expanded by 20.7%. The expansion in other manufacturing is attributed to increased output of products like cement blocks, fabricated metal products, beverages, chemical products, and other food, electricity and water supply and sewage. Mr. Speaker, electricity supply is also estimated to have grown in 2021 by 4.7%, while the water supply and sewage sector is estimated to have declined by 6.4%, partly on account of loss reduction efforts. Total water production amounted to 162 million cubic meters in 2021. Construction. Mr. Speaker, as indicated above in relation to production of sand and stone, investment in critical infrastructural projects by both the public and private sectors is driving and will continue to drive significant growth in construction activity. Current estimates show that the construction sector grew by 29.8% when compared with 2020. This, as I indicated, sir, is underpinned by both the major public infrastructure build-out that is currently underway, as well as the increased private sector activity in industrial, commercial, and residential construction. Mr. Speaker, growth in the services sector is estimated at 11.9%. This is largely the result of significant expansion in wholesale and retail trade and repairs, transport and storage, financial and insurance activities, and administrative and support services, which are estimated to have grown by 32.9%, 31.8%, 10.3%, and 7.4% respectively. Growth in wholesale and retail trade and repairs was primarily driven by heightened demand for consumption goods and construction materials. With respect to transport and storage, there was observed growth in the land transport sub-industry through cargo movements and increased passenger transport attributed to relaxed COVID-19 restrictions and the wider growth in the economy. The administrative and support services industries expanded on account of increased activities related to the rental and leasing of machinery and equipment used in the construction industry, rising customer care service activities, and an increase in demand for security services due to business expansion countrywide. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the balance of payments. The overall balance of payments recorded a surplus of 130.2 million at the end of 2021, 24.4% higher than the surplus in 2020. This was the result of a higher capital account surplus, which more than offset the larger deficit on the current account. Mr. Speaker, over the year, the deficit on the current account increased from 822.9 million to $1,533.1 million US dollars, primarily on account of the importation of Guyana's second floating production, storage and offloading vessel, FPSO as it is known, as well as a significant increase in net service payments. At the end of 2021, total export earnings amounted to $4,352 million US dollars, 68% higher than in 2020. This was mainly driven by oil exports growing by 179.6% to $2,975.5 million US dollars. Non-oil export earnings amounted to $1,376.5 million US dollars. Mr. Speaker, matching the intensity of the rise in exports, total import payments grew by 90.8% to $4,293.1 million US dollars. This, as I indicated earlier, was primarily attributed to the arrival of Guyana's second FPSO. This accounted for $1,658.6 million US dollars, or 38.6% of total imports for 2021. Further, net service payments stood at $2,557.1 million US dollars throughout, indeed, Mr. Speaker, throughout the external sector section, the section on the balance of payments. The dollars to which I refer would be US dollars. And I believe, particularly given events at the last sitting, this is an important clarification. If I might be permitted, sir, a slightly lighter moment. Mr. Speaker, net service payments stood at, as I was saying, $2,557.1 million US dollars at the end of 2021, rising 40.4% above the end 2020 position. This resulted from payments for non-factor and factor services growing by 40.1% and 60.8% respectively. Mr. Speaker, the capital account recorded a surplus of $1,678.5 million in 2021, $758.8 million US dollars above the surplus in 2020. This was primarily attributed to a 110.5% increase in net foreign direct investment to $4,336.2 million US dollars. The overall favorable performance on the capital account was also supported by the net position for the non-financial public sector, recording a 77.9% lower deficit of $42.1 million US dollars. This was largely due to disbursements increasing by 163.2% to $125.2 million US dollars. Mr. Speaker, the balance of payments surplus resulted in the Bank of Guyana's external reserve position increasing to $810.8 million US dollars at the end of 2021, up from $680.6 million at the end of 2020. Monetary developments. Mr. Speaker, the stock of broad money at the end of 2021 was $588.3 billion, 12.9% above the 2020 level. Growth was supported by narrow and quasi money expanding by 14.5% and 10.8% to $342.5 billion and $245.8 billion respectively. The expansion in the former resulted primarily from demand deposits and currency in circulation increasing by 16.6% and 12.6% respectively. The increase in demand deposits was driven by business enterprises and individual customers' deposits growing by 24.2% and 6.8% respectively. Mr. Speaker, at the end of 2021, net domestic credit stood at 225.1 billion, below the 2020 level of 337.3 billion. Whilst credit to the public sector declined, private sector credit increased by 10.4% to 286.9 billion, consistent with the strong growth in the economy and improved sentiments in the financial sector. Private sector credit growth was supported by increased lending of 16.4%, 27%, and 19.4% to businesses in the services, manufacturing, and agriculture sectors, respectively. The growth in lending to the services sector resulted mainly from increased credit for other services, distribution, and telecommunications, respectively. The increased lending to the manufacturing sector was primarily attributed to credit for other construction and engineering, and other manufacturing expanding also. Growth in credit to agriculture was primarily driven by increased lending for paddy production and shrimp and other fishing. Mr. Speaker, while credit to businesses in the mining and quarrying sector reduced, lending to households and for real estate mortgages increased by 7.4% and 5.5% respectively. The expansion in the former was supported by growth of 2.7 billion and 2.1 billion in lending for other purposes and motor cars respectively. The increase in real estate mortgage loans was due to mortgages granted for private dwellings, rising by 6.6% to 88.2 billion, reflecting our government's strong drive to promote homeownership. Mr. Speaker, as it relates to the public sector, in contrast to a net credit position of 127.2 billion at the end of 2020, the position reflected net deposits of 2.9 billion at the end of 2021. This improvement resulted from credit to central government declining from 188.2 billion to 73 billion as a result of the previously reported securitization of the government's overdraft with debentures. The overall favorable position was also supported by public enterprises and other public sector, net deposits increasing from 40.9 billion and 20.1 billion to 51.7 billion and 24.3 billion, respectively. Mr. Speaker, consistent with the increased lending by the commercial banks and the growth in the money supply, is total reserves deposited with the central bank declining by 6.5% to 117.4 billion over the year. Additionally, total liquid assets of commercial banks increased from 211.5 billion to 257.6 billion over the review period. Prices and income. Mr. Speaker, as discussed earlier, inflationary pressures are elevated worldwide. Guyana was not exempt from these pressures. Indeed, as also discussed previously, imported price pressures were mitigated by measures implemented by government, but were compounded by the domestic shock to productive output, especially as a result of the floods. The immediate aftermath of the flood resulted in a sharp spike in prices. But as production returned to some normalcy as the year progressed, some amount of reversion was visibly observed in the latter months of last year. This led, Mr. Speaker, to a 12-month inflation rate of 5.8% 6.7% in December 2021. This reflected higher food prices, which rose by 11.6% and contributed 5 percentage points to the inflation rate. With respect to interest rates, there were no substantial trade changes in Treasury bill yields over the review period. The 91-day Treasury bill and 182-day Treasury bill remained unchanged at 1.54 and 1.0 respectively, while the 364-day Treasury bill declined marginally from 1% to 0.99%. And on the commercial bank rates, the small savings rate decreased from 0.91% to 0.83%, while the weighted average lending rate also fell from 8.95 to 8.85%. Incomes. Mr. Speaker, our government remains firmly committed to improving the lives and livelihoods of all Guyanese. In 2021, a 7% across-the-board increase was paid to over 50,000 public servants, teachers, members of the disciplined services, and government pensioners. We also committed at the end of 2021 to seek to resolve the disparities that exist across positions in the public service salary scales, to ensure parity and consistency with which persons with similar qualifications are paid. The required work to support this process will be undertaken this year. Additionally, in recognition of the tremendous efforts of our health workers across the country, who have continued to confront the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, a special tax-free bonus equivalent to 2 weeks' salary and amounting to more than $600 million was paid to 9,200 health workers. Further, in fulfillment of our manifesto promise, our government restored the 1-month bonus to the members of the disciplined services, unconscionably removed, and which, on its restoration, resulted in a $1.2 billion payout to our hard-working men and women in uniform. Mr. Speaker, government also paid a $250,000 one-off cash payment to nearly 5,300 sugar workers who were so callously severed from the Enmore, Skeldon, Rose Hall, and Wales sugar estates. This injected over $1.3 billion into these communities. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the fiscal position, non-financial public sector. The non-financial public sector deficit after grants was $121.8 billion, equivalent to 10.7% of GDP at the end of 2021. This reflected the expanded public sector investment program, growth in public expenditure to finance social programs and to respond to the shocks encountered during the year, as well as the impact of the revenue measures implemented to provide relief to businesses and households, including to reverse the punitive taxes that had been imposed during the 2015 to 2020 period. On the central government side, the operations of the central government recorded a deficit of $115.7 billion, 10.2% of GDP at the end of 2021. This is largely attributed to a $61.8 billion increase in total expenditure, which outweighed the $38.5 billion growth in revenue. Mr. Speaker, the strong performance of the economy and expanded activity across multiple sectors resulted in revenue gains that more than offset the annualized loss from the revenue measures implemented in the 2020 and 2021 budgets. As a result, total current revenue net of inflows of the Guyana Red Plus Investment Fund, GRIF as it is known, was $265.8 billion, 16.7% above 2020. Tax revenue collections, which accounted for 96% of total revenue collections, net of GRIF again, amounted to $255.1 billion, a growth of 16.8% over 2020. Internal revenue collections increased by $20.1 billion or 17.8%, or by $20.1 billion or 17.8% over 2020. This was driven largely by higher increases of personal income tax, PAYE, private sector corporation taxes, and withholding taxes. The increase in personal income tax of $8.2 billion was driven by higher remittances by employers in both the public and private sectors. Collections of private sector corporation taxes grew by 22.6% due to higher payments by companies within the retail trade, which we will recall performed extremely well in the productive sector side, telecommunications, and manufacturing of beverages sectors, amongst others. Withholding taxes grew by $4.8 billion, largely on account of collections from the oil and gas sector. Mr. Speaker, the value-added tax, VAT, and excise tax collections increased by $10.9 billion or 13.1%. And underlying this performance is a very interesting set of facts. Excise tax collections grew by $12.5 billion, above the $33.9 billion in 2020, as a result of higher tax collections from the importation of motor vehicles and petroleum products. Collections from the importation of motor vehicles grew by $6.7 billion above 2020, reflective of the budget measure in 2020 that removed the punitive restriction prohibiting importation of vehicles above 8 years. And what this demonstrates, sir, is that the removal of that restriction unleashed demand for motor vehicles. Those were people who wanted to import motor vehicles and could not import motor vehicles during 2015 to 2020. But they became a motor car owner. They became a motor car owner in 2021. On the downside, collections from VAT, net of refunds, totaled $48.4 billion, $1.5 billion below the level in 2020. This was primarily attributed, sir, to the zero rating of several previously standard rated goods and services, giving back to the people of Guyana. It would be recalled, sir, that this People's Progressive Party civic government under the leadership of His Excellency, the President, Dr. Mohammed Irfan Ali, committed even prior to our assumption of office that we will roll back those punitive taxes, and immediately upon assuming office, within weeks brought an emergency budget in 2020 and delivered on our promise. This is the direct result, sir. Mr. Speaker, customs and trade tax collections were $27 billion, a $5.7 billion increase above 2020, resulting from higher collection of import duties, of $5.1 billion from goods imported within the wholesale food, beverages, and tobacco category, and retail sales of hardware, paints, glass, automotive fuel rather, household appliances, and furniture, all reflecting the resumption of economic activity and growth in disposable incomes. Non-tax revenues totaled $10.7 billion, $1.3 billion above 2020. Mr. Speaker, central government expenditure totaled $387.3 billion, $61.8 billion above the amount expended in 2020. Within this, non-interest current expenditure for 2021 was $275 billion, growing by 13.8%. This was primarily driven by growth in other goods and services of $17.8 billion and transfer payments of $9.6 billion. The higher expenditure within the goods and services category was attributed mainly to the more than $7 billion in payments to farmers and households for flood relief assistance to recover from the floods. There was also higher spending on COVID-19 vaccines due to the countrywide rollout campaign. The growth in transfer payments resulted from such factors as the restoration of the grants to parents of children attending school, as well as the extension of that program to private school students for the very first time. It also reflected increased in training expenditure on training, such as through the provision of 6,000 online scholarships under the Guyana Online Academy for Learning program, or the GOAL program. Mr. Speaker, capital expenditure grew by $28.3 billion to $104.4 billion on account of the ramped up public sector investment program to support critical infrastructure development, including transport infrastructure, such as roads and bridges, as well as the social sector, such as schools and public healthcare facilities. A significant contributing factor was also the resumption of the government housing program. Mr. Speaker, the public enterprises at the end of 2021 recorded a deficit of $6.2 billion. Total receipts were $140.3 billion, 20.2% higher than 2020, and total expenditure was $146.5 billion, 24.1% above 2020. A significant contributory factor was higher operational costs at GPL due to increased oil prices. Public debt management. Mr. Speaker, over the last year, our government has continued its well-established track record of prudent public debt management, despite global and domestic shocks which constrained economic activity, affected government revenue, and necessitated increased government spending to curb the social and economic ramifications. In executing Guyana's public debt management functions, we have stuck steadfastly to the tried and tested strategy of contracting development financing in a manner that is conducive to both cost minimization and risk mitigation. Consequently, we have succeeded in preserving the sustainability of Guyana's total stock of public and publicly guaranteed debt, which amounted to $3.126 billion at the end of last year, equivalent to 38.7% of GDP. And it will be noted, sir, that that represents one of the lowest debt to GDP ratios in this entire hemisphere. The end 2021 stock of public and publicly guaranteed debt represented a 20.6% increase from 2020, primarily driven by growth of domestic public debt for reasons I will shortly outline. At the end of last year, domestic public debt, at the end of 2021 that is, domestic public debt totaled $1.731 billion, 36.4% higher than at the end of 2020, mainly due, sir, to two factors. The first is an 81% increase in the stock of treasury bills to $702.7 million, reflecting this government's commitment to finance fiscal operations by recourse to the market instead of perpetuating the inherited malpractice of overdraft accumulation at the Bank of Guyana. The second factor, sir, responsible for the higher domestic debt is the issuance of debentures to the central bank in June 2021 for a total value of $959.2 million. These debentures were issued primarily to securitize and regularize the inherited overdraft. The issuance of these debentures restored a positive balance on public deposits at the central bank and also restored the integrity of Guyana's fiscal accounts. The stock of external public debt grew by 5.5% over the last year to US $1.392 million. This increase was largely influenced by positive net flows from creditors. Mr. Speaker, total public debt service payments amounted to $121.9 million in 2021, mainly as a result of debt service on the increased domestic debt stock to which I have just alluded. The growth in domestic debt service payments was caused by three factors. Firstly, an increase in debt service payments on debentures held by the National Insurance Scheme due to an early repayment which yielded interest rate cost savings to the central government and improved liquidity at the NIS. Secondly, 2021 marked the first year that the central government fully covered the payments under a bond issued by the National Industrial and Commercial Investments Limited in 2018, a bond with which I believe members of this honorable house are very familiar, and a bond that was issued with an unconditional government guarantee. Thirdly, domestic debt service costs were also driven up by the payment of interest on the debenture to which I just referred. On the external side, debt service payments increased by 6% in 2021 due to the commencement of principal repayments on several loans to our external creditors. The Natural Resource Fund. Mr. Speaker, it would be recalled that the previous government had established the Natural Resource Fund by enacting an NRF Act in 2019, and that our government enacted a revised NRF Act last month to address the most egregious deficiencies of the 2019